Private First Class Eddie Miller was going to die in a ditch in Germany, and the last thing he would see was a man he couldn't even find. The sniper had been playing with them for 20 minutes. Not killing them, playing. A shot would crack across the frozen forest and someone would scream, and then silence would fall again while they pressed their faces into the ice and prayed. Corporal Davis had taken a round through the hand. Private Chen had a furrow across his scalp that was bleeding into his eyes. The sniper wasn't trying to kill them quickly. He was pinning them down, keeping them frozen in the ditch while something else moved into position. Miller heard that something else before he saw it. The grinding squeal of tracks on frozen earth, the rumble of a diesel engine, the distinctive rattle of German half-track suspension working over the churned-up forest floor. He raised his head just enough to see over the lip of the ditch, and his blood turned to slush. The Hanomag was 60 yards away and closing. A Sd.Kfz, 251, the workhorse of the German mechanized infantry. But this one wasn't carrying troops. This one had been converted into something worse. An MG-42 machine gun sat behind a steel shield on the rear deck, the barrel pointed directly at their position. The gunner was invisible behind the armor, protected from everything the Americans could throw at him. The sniper was the bait. The half-track was the butcher. Lieutenant Crawford was shouting something about holding position, about waiting for armor support that was supposed to be somewhere to the south. Miller looked at the half-track grinding closer through the frozen mud and calculated exactly how many seconds they had before the MG-42 opened up and turned their ditch into a mass grave. Not enough seconds. Nowhere close to enough. Sergeant Williams was firing his bar at the approaching vehicle, the heavy automatic rifle bucking against his shoulder. The rounds sparked off the sloped armor of the half-track like fireflies and ricocheted into the forest. The steel plate was too thick. The angle was too deflecting. The Browning automatic rifle, which could tear through a brick wall, was bouncing off German engineering like hail off a tin roof. It's not working. Williams screamed. The armor's too heavy. Miller looked down at the weapon in his hands. A Winchester Model 1897 trench shotgun. 6 rounds in the tube, 3 more in his bandolier. 9 shells total. Buckshot loads, designed for close-quarters trench fighting in the previous war. Each shell contained 9 lead pellets that would spread into a pattern capable of clearing a room or a section of trench. Against men, it was devastating. Against steel armor plate, it was less than useless. The buckshot would hit the half-track and scatter like thrown gravel. The German gunner would laugh behind his shield and continue his approach. The lieutenant was still shouting about holding position. The half-track was 40 yards away. The sniper cracked another round into the ditch, this one close enough to throw frozen dirt into Miller's face. They were going to die. Every man in this ditch was going to die in the next 90 seconds, unless something changed. Miller reached into his bandolier and pulled out a shell. The brass base gleamed dully in the gray winter light. The red paper tube was standard military issue, containing 9 no buckshot pellets packed in sawdust and wadding. He looked at the shell for a long moment, remembering something he had sworn he would never do. Then he pulled out his trench knife. The technique was called a cut shell, and the United States Army had explicitly banned it from every theater of operations. The prohibition wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a guideline. It was a court-martial offense, and the reason for the ban was written in the medical records of every soldier who had tried it and gotten the cut wrong. The principle was simple. You took a knife and scored a ring around the paper body of the shotgun shell, about a 1/4 inch below where the paper met the brass base. You cut deep enough that the shell would shear apart when fired, but not deep enough that you spilled the shot or compromised the powder charge. When you fired a cut shell, the brass base and the severed paper tube separated in the barrel. Instead of loose pellets spreading into a wide pattern, the entire payload, buckshot, wadding, paper, everything, exited the barrel as a single mass. You effectively turned 9 separate projectiles into one improvised slug weighing nearly an ounce. The impact characteristics changed completely. Buckshot dispersed and lost energy quickly. A cut shell slug concentrated all that energy into a single point of impact. It could punch through wooden doors. It could penetrate car doors. It could, theoretically, defeat light armor plate at close range. Theoretically. In practice, the cut shell was one of the most dangerous field modifications in the infantry arsenal. Get the cut too shallow, and the shell wouldn't separate properly. Get the cut too deep, and the paper would rupture in the chamber instead of in the barrel. When that happened, the expanding gases had nowhere to go except backward, into the receiver and into the shooter's face. The pressure spike could peel the barrel open like a flower. It could blow the receiver apart and turn steel fragments into shrapnel. It could rupture the shooter's hands, blind them, kill them instantly. The Army had documented 17 cases of catastrophic barrel failure from improvised cut shells in the first 2 years of the war. 8 of those soldiers had died. The rest had been permanently maimed. The ban was absolute. Any soldier caught modifying ammunition in the field would face disciplinary action up to and including court-martial. Miller looked at the half-track 30 yards away. He looked at the MG-42 barrel starting to track toward their position. He looked at Lieutenant Crawford, who was screaming into a radio that wasn't receiving any response. Court-martial was a problem for soldiers who survived until tomorrow. He pressed the blade of his trench knife against the paper tube and began to cut. The trick was pressure. Too much, and you'd go straight through. Too little, and you'd create a partial cut that might not shear cleanly. You had to feel the paper compress under the blade. Feel the moment when you reached the depth that would separate under the stress of firing without compromising before then. Miller had learned the technique from his uncle, a veteran of the Argonne who had used cut shells to hunt deer during the Depression. His uncle had taught him the feel of it, the precise pressure, the way the paper resisted and then gave under the blade. He had practiced on empty shells in the barn behind their farmhouse, cutting ring after ring until his fingers knew exactly how deep to go. He had never done it in combat. He had never done it with his hands shaking from cold and fear. He had never done it with a sniper watching for muzzle flash and a machine gun 20 seconds from opening fire. The blade completed its circuit around the shell. Miller held it up to the gray light and examined the cut. Clean, even, deep enough to separate, shallow enough to hold together until it reached the barrel. He hoped. The half-track was 20 yards away. The MG-42 gunner was adjusting his aim. Miller could see the barrel swinging toward the ditch, toward the cluster of American soldiers pressing themselves into the frozen mud. He shoved the cut shell into the chamber of the Winchester and pumped the action closed. The mechanism felt wrong somehow, the modified shell sitting differently than a standard round. He tried to ignore the sensation. He tried to ignore the voice in his head reminding him that the shell could rupture at any moment and turn his hands into hamburger. He rose to one knee. The sniper cracked a round over his head so close he felt the wind of its passage. He ignored it. He had one chance at this. One shot. If the shell failed, if the slug didn't penetrate, he would die before he could pump another round into the chamber. The half-track's vision slit was a narrow horizontal opening in the armored hull, barely 6 inches wide and 2 inches tall. It was the only vulnerable point on the entire vehicle. Standard buckshot would spray harmlessly across the armor plate. Even if 1 or 2 pellets found the slit, they would lose too much energy to be lethal. But a cut shell slug, concentrating all 9 pellets into a single mass, might punch through that opening and kill the driver. Might. Miller put the bead sight on the vision slit and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester roared. The recoil slammed into Miller's shoulder with unusual violence, more than a standard buckshot load should produce. The pressure spike from the unconventional payload had increased the kick significantly. For a terrifying instant, he thought the barrel had ruptured, thought he was about to experience the catastrophic failure that had killed 8 soldiers before him. The barrel held. The cut shell performed exactly as designed. The paper tube sheared cleanly at the scored ring, and the entire mass, brass base, paper tube, wadding and buckshot, exited the barrel as a single projectile weighing nearly an ounce. It crossed the 20 yards to the half-track in a fraction of a second and struck the vision slit dead center. The improvised slug was too large to pass cleanly through the narrow opening. It hit the edges of the slit and deformed, spreading slightly as it forced its way through. But enough of the mass penetrated. Enough of the buckshot and wadding and paper fragments entered the driver's compartment with lethal velocity. The half-track lurched. The engine coughed and died. The vehicle rolled to a stop at an angle, its tracks digging into the frozen mud. Nobody emerged from the driver's hatch. Miller was already cutting the second shell. The MG-42 gunner had seen the muzzle flash. He was swinging the heavy machine gun toward Miller's position, his hands working the traverse mechanism with desperate speed. In 3 seconds, the buzzsaw would open up, and Miller would be shredded by 1,200 rounds per minute. Miller's knife completed the cut. He shoved the shell into the chamber and pumped the action. The gunner's hands found the grip of the MG-42. His finger was reaching for the trigger. Miller put the bead on the steel shield that protected the gunner. Not the vision slit this time. The shield itself. He was betting that the improvised slug could penetrate the lighter armor of the gun shield where standard buckshot couldn't. He fired. The cut shell hit the shield and punched through. The gunner jerked backward and collapsed behind the armor plate. The MG-42 fell silent. Its barrel pointed at empty sky. 2 cut shells. 2 kills. The half-track that should have slaughtered them all sat dead in the frozen mud, crewed by corpses. But the sniper was still out there. Miller cut a 3rd shell with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was burning through his system like fire. He could feel his heart pounding in his throat. He could feel the pressure of the moment crushing down on him. The sniper was 75 yards out, concealed somewhere in the frozen tree line. Miller couldn't see him. He couldn't identify the position. The German had been shooting from deep cover, using the muzzle flash of other weapons to mask his own position. But Miller had just fired twice. He had revealed his location, and the sniper would be adjusting his aim right now, centering his scope on the American soldier who had just destroyed his trap. Miller scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement, no shape that didn't belong. The German was invisible, a ghost in gray and white who had been killing Americans all morning. Then he saw it, a faint disturbance in the snow on a low branch, 30 feet up an ancient oak, the kind of displacement you would get if someone had recently climbed into position, the kind of pattern that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Miller raised the Winchester. 75 yards was extreme range for a shotgun, even with an improvised slug. The trajectory would drop significantly. The accuracy would be questionable. Standard buckshot would be completely useless at that distance, the pellets spreading into a pattern 20 feet wide. But a cut shell, holding together as a single mass, might maintain enough accuracy to hit a man-sized target. Might. He aimed high, compensating for the drop. He found the spot where he thought the sniper was concealed, and added 6 inches of elevation. He let out half a breath and held it. The Winchester roared. The cut shell flew true for 60 yards, then began to drop. The improvised slug tumbled slightly as it lost velocity, the uneven mass distribution affecting its flight path. It struck the tree branch 4 inches below Miller's point of aim. But 4 inches below his point of aim was exactly where the German sniper was lying. The slug hit the sniper in the upper chest and knocked him out of the tree. He fell 30 feet and hit the frozen ground with a sound that carried across the forest. He didn't move after he landed. He would never move again. The ditch was silent. The half-track was silent. The sniper was silent. Lieutenant Crawford was staring at Miller with an expression that combined disbelief, horror, and something that might have been grudging respect. He had seen Miller cutting the shells. He knew exactly what kind of modification had just saved his entire squad. Those were cut shells, the lieutenant said flatly. Miller ejected the spent casing and pumped a standard round into the chamber. His hands were steadier now. The shaking had stopped. Yes, sir. That's a court-martial offense. Yes, sir. The lieutenant looked at the smoking half-track. He looked at the body of the sniper crumpled at the base of the oak tree. He looked at the men in his squad who were still alive because a private had ignored direct orders and army regulations. I didn't see anything, Crawford said quietly. None of us saw anything. You engaged the enemy with standard ammunition and achieved results through superior marksmanship. That's what my report is going to say. Do you understand? Miller understood perfectly. The court-martial paperwork never materialized. The after-action report mentioned only that the squad had successfully neutralized an enemy armor infantry ambush through aggressive small arms fire. The specific ammunition used was not documented. The technique that the army had explicitly banned was never mentioned, but the soldiers who survived that ditch remembered. They told the story to other units, to replacement troops, to anyone who would listen. The tale of the cut shell that killed a half-track and downed a sniper spread through the Hürtgen Forest like whispers through a cathedral. Some soldiers started carrying trench knives specifically for the purpose. Some started practicing the cut on empty shells during quiet moments. The army's ban remained in effect, but enforcement became selectively blind in certain units where survival mattered more than regulations. The cut shell technique never entered any official manual. It was never taught in any training program. It remained a forbidden piece of soldiers' lore, passed down through whispered conversations and demonstrated behind supply tents where officers couldn't see. But it worked. In desperate moments when standard ammunition wasn't enough, when the enemy had advantages that the manual said couldn't be overcome, the cut shell gave infantrymen a tool they weren't supposed to have. A way to punch above their weight class, a way to turn a trench shotgun into something the designers never intended. Miller finished the war as a sergeant. He never received official recognition for what happened in that frozen ditch. He never asked for any. The medal he would have earned was traded for the promise that his commanding officer would forget what he saw. Years later, when his grandchildren asked about his service, he would sometimes show them the trench knife he had carried through Germany. The blade was still sharp, still capable of making the precise cut that had saved his life and the lives of his squad mates. The army said you couldn't do it, he would tell them. They said it was too dangerous, that it would get you killed. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was lucky. But sometimes lucky is all you've got. Sometimes the thing that's supposed to kill you is the thing that saves you. Sometimes you have to break the rules to stay alive long enough to follow them again. The cut shell technique is still theoretically possible today. Modern plastic shotgun shells respond differently than the paper shells of World War II, but the principle remains the same. Most experts still advise against it. Most manuals still prohibit it. But soldiers in desperate situations have never been particularly interested in what the manuals prohibit. They've always been more interested in what works, and in a frozen ditch in the Hürtgen Forest, with a sniper above and a half-track approaching and standard ammunition bouncing off German steel, Eddie Miller proved that sometimes the forbidden technique is the only technique that matters. If Miller's story of improvised survival hit you the way it hit me, smash that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that soldiers who broke the rules to save their brothers deserve to be remembered. If you're not subscribed, now is the time, because next week we're uncovering another banned field modification that proved the experts catastrophically wrong. Drop a comment and answer this honestly. If you were holding a shotgun that might explode in your face, watching an armored vehicle roll toward your squad, would you cut that shell or die by the book? I want to know. I'll see you in the next one.